Luke in Birmingham, how are you?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Right. I'm just gonna present to you why I choose to believe. Okay. Let me start by saying, firstly, the God that I serve doesn't actually require a human being to know about him or in order for him to be healed by him. See,
In order for him to what?
In order for him to be healed by him.
So you believe in a God that heals, but belief in the God isn't required for healing?
No, and healing from selfishness into selflessness, because we are all born selfish, as I'm sure we can all admit. We're all born selfish, egocentrism. We're all born egocentric, and the opposite is actually the design for life.
Okay,
and,
I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. You believe in a God that can change somebody from being selfish to selfless, but belief in that
Right.
God is not required for that transition.
Not necessarily.
That's
No.
an interesting question for free
Okay.
will, then.
No. What he will present oh yes, and the next thing I was going to say is this: the God that I actually believe in values human freedom more than anything, and is actually willing to die, give his own life, than use his own powers to violate your own freedoms.
Okay.
And that's key. Secondly, the second evidence I have is that.
Whoa.
Wait.
My religion,
Well, Luke,
You can't have a second evidence until you have a first one.
okay, yeah, sorry.
there
I
wasn't
didn't
any
mean to-
evidence. That was just a definition of what you believe.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
that's true. Okay, yeah. Okay, then moving on from that, my religion teaches that God is love, and this love is given a definition. It's not an emotion or a warm fuzzy feeling. It's actually a principle upon which life is based. It is the principle of giving, and it says his nature. This principle of giving can actually be seen in what he has made. And so, if he created this world and his nature is love, and he is giving, you can see this in all systems that promote life. And an example of this principle found in nature would be respiration. With every breath that you take, you give out carbon dioxide to the plants. Plants give back. Give out oxygen. Give out carbon dioxide to the plants. Plants give back oxygen. It's the principle of giving that sustains life. Furthermore, you can see this example.
Hang on, Luke. Before you get to the furthermore, I mean, you've said God is love and God is nature, and that's all poetic.
No.
That's all poetic stuff. You didn't say that?
I didn't say God. I didn't say God is nature. I
Okay.
said his nature can be seen.
You said that
in
your religion
his
teaches
his
that.
nature.
You said
his
your
nature.
religion teaches that God is
what
love.
nature?
No, God's nature. God's nature is love. And
God's
this
nature
love,
is love, and
You're
then
right.
which is some nice little poetic non-descriptions, and then you say that this is a principle, and then you say that the evidence for this principle is seen in nature through something like respiration. And what I'm going to say to that is that the process of respiration, this synergistic process that you're talking about, where we exhale carbon dioxide that the plants use, that they then provide us with oxygen, that is an entirely material, understood scientific principle that doesn't
Yeah.
require love
Okay.
or
Right.
anything beyond that.
I'd like to also to bring
Okay.
up. This is an important thing to think about. If God's nature is love, and you are apparently, I would assume, one of God's favorite, creations. You are a human
Right.
being. That means that you're an animal. That means that
Okay.
in order for you to exist, you must consume and digest living cells,
Right.
as all animals do. So God's nature, according to you, is
Okay.
evident when we see a cheetah outrunning a springbok and tearing it apart. Am I right?
That goes on to prove my point even more, because then my religion also teaches that our planet is infected by an antagonistic principle to his nature that brings death, and this is the principle of selfishness, which is the opposite of love. It's the principle of me first and seeking out me first, because greater love is when you give your life for something, and then this other antagonistic principle is whereby you sacrifice someone else's life for yours. Okay. And in nature, you can see this when you see animals killing each other to promote their own well-being. And
But I need to understand something here. Who created the animals?
God did.
Okay. God made them have to
Yeah.
depend on consuming living cells. God
Not
built
originally-
death
not originally,
into
as
the
in God-
survival system.
Yes, that's because we are infected with this.
God
Well,
infected us, is what you're saying.
Not, my religion doesn't teach that. It teaches. It
God
explains
created
how
the animal.
people
The animal is
Hang on.
dependent on death to survive.
He's saying not originally.
Okay.
Okay.
You're
in
saying
the
that there
Garden
was
of
a
Eden.
yeah,
In the
yeah.
Garden of Eden.
You're
in the Garden
saying
of Eden.
You're saying that there's a time when animals didn't have to eat other animals to live?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Are
Do
you-
you have evidence for that?
Okay, well, I'm going to.
Yes or no
when you
question,
look at
please.
it-
Can
when
you
look
answer
at
with
it
a
in
yes or a no,
totality,
please? Can you say yes or no, please? Do you
I
have evidence for that?
Animals, there's a time when animals never had to eat each other.
I didn't hear. Was that a yes, you have evidence for that, or was that a no, you don't have evidence for that?
And by
Please
the
answer.
way, there is an audio problem with the phones.
How can I have evidence for it?
So
Then
the
why
answer
would
is
you-
no.
So the answer is no.
Okay.
No,
Now, why do you believe it if you don't have evidence for it?
because it makes sense in totality with the rest of the evidence that I see.
Wait, with the rest of the evidence.
Yeah.
So what evidence? You said you don't have
Okay,
evidence, now you say you do.
The law of love is this, that in order for a living system to live, it needs to give, and when giving stops, death comes.
Wait,
And you
so
see this-
so the
you see-
springbok gives of itself to the cheetah?
Can I just explain? Can I just please have 3 minutes? 3 minutes to explain what I'm trying to say, and then
I'll
you
give
can
you
ask
90
questions.
seconds starting now.
Okay, thank you. The law of giving is this. You see in the oceans. Oceans give the water to the clouds, and the clouds rain back down to the waters. And this is a circle of giving, and it continues. If a body of water if a body of water separates himself from this circle, it stagnates and everything in it dies. Secondly, you see this in your blood flows in your body in constant. This is again an example of this circle of giving. If you cut yourself, you cut the circulation, death ensues, and you see flowers give the pollen to the bees, and the bees increase the population of the flowers, and so on. It's a principle of giving. If the flower should choose to stop, then death will come. If you choose not to breathe, you choose not to give, you tie a plastic bag around your head, you die. And so this is
45.
you can see this in everything, and you see the planets circulate around the sun. Electrons circulate around the nucleus. You have the Krebs cycle. You have the carbon cycle. So everything is designed to operate in a circle. So to operate upon giving, right?
Are you done early?
And so when giving stops, death comes. And so this is a law because it's testable. You can see this you can see this in nature, and also it's also testable in the fact that in nature we see things that do not operate upon this law, and this is what we call sin, and this is what's killing people, and this is God's plan on healing people. So and then I'm done with that evidence. I have another one, but I'm done with that.
Cool, 90 seconds exactly.
Okay. Your evidence is that we see natural systems exist, and so we assume that they were created by God for no apparent reason at all. We just make that assumption. We didn't have any evidence for it, but that's what we want to believe, so we make that assumption.
There's a law.
Hang on, you had your time.
You said you could test this,
Yes.
and that you could demonstrate sin. Well, I would be impressed if you could even define sin, but let's see a test for sin. You're saying that animals eat each other in defiance of this law because of
Yes.
sin, and that you can test for it. How do you do that?
No. Sin is actually defiance of this law. This is the definition of sin. It is lawlessness.
What did you say was testable?
The law of giving
Okay,
things life.
let's stop this right here, because something isn't a law just because you call it a law. And what you've done is engaged in one great big flippin' argument from analogy. You go around and you observe that there is some order in the universe, something neither of us would reject. And then you say, look, there's this here, and it's similar to this here. And there's this here, and it's similar to this here. And there seems to be kind of similarities in order in the universe. Therefore, there must be a law that everything is this way. And I'm going to extend that further and call it a law of love. And the things that violate the law are sin. You cannot simply.
Not only that.
You cannot simply run around making observations and create a great big argument for analogy, and then give it a new label that allows you to give it another new label of God.
And then
That's
you also
asinine.
use the example wherein the flower gives its pollen to the bee. I didn't see any tendrils offering the bee anything. What I see is a flower, and a bee goes in and takes it.
Yeah.
How do you demonstrate? How do you test that?
It is a design.
How do you know?
How do you test that?
How could you test that? Okay, to test that, then you take a flower and try and grow it in isolation from bees.
No, that's not a test for design.
So what you're testing there is the evolution of symbiotic systems. So, how do you test for your assumption of God and that your secondary assumption that God's nature is love, and your third assumption?
It's falsifiable in this way. If you can give me an
Wait,
example of
are you referring to the Bible? The Bible that had Adam, and he said you can eat of all these,
I don't know.
all of these fruits, and you will have these fruits for meat. This was before the fall. Is that what you're talking about?
No. That God never asked them to eat any meat before in the wild.
The fruit of the tree of life and the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can eat any of the plants in this garden. He didn't say that.
Did he say meat?
Yes, he did. These will be for you as meat. Do you think that only animals have living cells? Do you not have to consume living cells in order to survive? Did the Bible not say that Adam had to consume living cells before the fall?
I'm not sure it said living cells. It doesn't say living cells.
No, it doesn't say living cells. It says you can eat all these things. Animals have to consume living cells. That's what it means. We can't eat rocks. There's the only thing we can eat, living cells. Death is what we depend on to exist, and that is what the Bible says was before the fall. Now, is that your reference for how animals live in sin before the fall?
I'm sorry, I don't know where you get the idea that they could eat living cells. Please tell me.
I'm sorry, you were quoting the Bible, so was I.
Where are you quoting from?
Genesis chapter 1 or 2. You want me to go through it real quick?
Chapter 2.
No, I mean, like, where you said you could eat living cells before the fall. I don't see that anywhere.
Are you familiar with the story of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the fruit of the tree of life?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And one of the questions I always like to ask people is, what if Adam didn't eat of either tree? What would happen then?
You have to understand the purpose of the tree. The purpose of the tree...
I understand the purpose of the tree. I want to know what you think it is.
Okay, the purpose of the tree was for Adam to have a choice to either obey God and grow in trust or give him a chance to choose his own path in his own direction. This is the freedom that he
So they're metaphorical trees then. They weren't real trees.
Are you ready? Okay. Genesis chapter 2, verse 16. This is before the fall. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. That's an instruction, according to your beliefs, that God instructed them to eat from any of the trees except this one, correct?
Okay, yeah.
Are not those trees living cells that they had to consume? Do you not kill the apple and the pear when you take it off the tree and eat it?
Potatoes really don't survive being eaten very well.
There's a difference between fruits and animals. The fruits and vegetables were designed to be eaten. They don't feel pain. They don't feel anything.
You're done. You're done, Luke. Because now you're just making excuses. Your fallacy, even within the own context of your beliefs, has been pointed out. That this sinful thing of eating existed prior to the fall. That's already been pointed out. I also pointed out that you're just making arguments from analogy. And now when you've had that fallacy pointed out, now you're making ad hoc excuses that, fruits are different.
And it's worse than that because you've also made an admission that the trees are metaphorical, that they were a choice. Well, we know that. All the way through the Bible, there are other references to eat of the fruit of this tree. And in every other instance except Genesis, it is automatically understood that when they talk about the fruit of this, they're talking about the results of our choices. It is a metaphor in every other instance, except Genesis, where they suddenly declare that the trees were made out of wood and that you could make pies out of the fruit. But
Okay,
you're saying now,
everything-
that it was a choice of whether they could live a long and healthy life or whether they were going to succumb to evil. Thank you for pointing out that it was just a fable with a moral and a metaphor, and that they weren't trees. You couldn't cut them down and build canoes.
Okay, thank you. Everything you said is relevant to the law of love that I've explained, and I've said
I don't doubt that.
It's falsifiable in the fact that if you can give me an example of life that exists without giving, you falsified the law.
No, Luke.
And I can give that example.
Even if you could give that example, it doesn't falsify the law, because first you have to actually establish and define this. You can't just call a foundational principle of the natural order a law of love. Hey, guess what? When I drop
Call it what you want.
Stop. When I drop this pen, it's going to fall. That's something we can test for and falsify it. But I don't get to call that process love and attribute it to a God. That's the part that you can't test for.
What you're talking about is an assumption. And it's a baseless
And you
assumption
admitted
if
earlier-
it doesn't have evidence.
You admitted earlier that you didn't have evidence for it.
I admitted I didn't have evidence for the law of love.
You didn't.
Okay, Webster's definition defines the law as I'm using it as a statement of an order or
You're
relation
done, Luke.
of a phenomenon.
Luke,
that
congratulations.
so far isn't-
Luke, congratulations, you're done. And I'll tell you why, so that next time when you call in, you don't make this mistake. Dictionaries describe usage. And when we're talking about philosophical issues of epistemology, and when we're talking about scientific investigation and the nature of laws, you don't just have to pull up Webster's as if it's going to add some validity to your logical fallacies. You made arguments from analogy, you started changing around labels, and you have convinced yourself that this is all evidence. And what you're actually engaged in is a grand argument from ignorance. You look around at the world and you see order, and you simply can't think of any other way that this order could exist without making an appeal to a God. It's an argument from ignorance, and it's demonstrable. And I don't care if you pull up Webster's, Funkin' Wacknells, or Rand McNally and draw a map. It doesn't add to your argument. If you're not going to put out things that add to your argument, you're done.
You've also said that it was a law. A law is demonstrable without faith. You said it was falsifiable and then admitted that it clearly was not. It should be, you've failed the criteria that you yourself have laid out. And then the only evidence of any sort, the only indication that you ever had, the only thing that you said ever implied at this point to you at all was a misinterpretation of a passage in an old storybook that you then later admitted was a metaphor. I think you need to rethink your position.
I didn't admit it was a metaphor.
Yes, you did. And
Well,
fortunately, these shows are recorded so that you can go back and play it and say, aha, that's where I did it.
I'll even let you off the hook and just say that in the confusing circumstances, you said something that you can later take back if you don't think it was a metaphor. It's neither here nor there. You present something that has, your argument has no teeth, no evidence, and when called on it, you first admit there's no evidence, then you try to present something, then you're going to dictionaries.
No, I said I have no evidence that life existed before where animals didn't have to kill each other. That's all I say. The law itself is separate to what I say then.
It's not a law just because you say it's a law. Something doesn't become true just because I say it's true. Look, I'm surrounded by naked cheerleaders. It doesn't work that way.
A law is a statement of fact that is verifiably accurate under all or under a given set of circumstances by all observers. You're definitely not talking about that.
By you and everyone. Everyone could have observed what I've said. Everything needs to give, otherwise they die.
If it is a law, it will be observable by everyone.
The things that you're observing and the examples you provided, I agree. They are consistent with what you're saying. And what I'm saying in response to that is, so what?
You believe that?
Hang on.
Okay then.
You have provided examples of something. That in and of itself is not sufficient to establish that there is a law with a designed purpose, which is your intent here. If all you're saying is that there is order in the universe, we already agreed with that. If all that you're saying is that in the circle of life there is life and death, we already agreed with that. What we're saying is you can't get from here to here. You can't get from the bee takes pollen from the flower in order to pollinate another flower, and then say, this is because some intelligent being created a law that this is the way things work. You can't get from A to B.
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to go gradually and show you that there's another law additional to the law of love.
But the law of love doesn't exist, and you did say that earlier. Go back and watch this show again.
Okay.
You did.
We have two options. Either natural, either they came about naturally, or they came about by an intelligent designer. And if I can demonstrate.
Well, actually, we have only one option that's ever been indicated. We've seen that evolution happens. We know that it happens. We can measure it. We can watch it in real time, in real life, under controlled conditions. There's no question about that. Evolution happens. Your options are that if there is a God, the intelligent designer drives evolution. Or if there is not a God, that's okay because evolution doesn't need it.
In fact,
You're adding a completely, hold on now, you're adding a superfluous assumption, one which you admit is based on fables in lieu of evidence.
Okay, you are free to believe as you wish, and so am I.
Well, thank you.
And
I'm glad I got permission from Luke.
Yeah, and I was just presenting to you what makes me, what I observe and see, and then look at this and then think.
The sad thing, Luke, is that you didn't present me what makes you believe that.
You know what?
You have an assumed conclusion, but you never explained why you assume your conclusion.
Your whole argument, and I know you won't see it this way, but honestly, this is accurate, can be distilled to, I look around and see this, and I can't think of anything better to explain it than God. Well, guess what? That's not an argument.
And it certainly isn't a law.
Yeah. And on that, I guess you can try again another